Hi everybody! Today we're going to read Jack and the Giant, A Story Full of Beans. We have talked about Jack and the Beanstalk, the classic original fairy tale, and now we're going to read a fractured version of it. And as you know, fractured version is where they take that original and break it. It's a small break, like when you fracture a bone, you break the bone. Here we are breaking the story and messing with it somehow. And in this case, we are changing up the setting, the time and the place where the story occurs. So this one is not a classic English version. This is an American Western version. So they have set it like in the early 1800s out in the wild, wild west of the United States. So you're going to see like the cowboy clothing and some of the funny language in there from the Western style as well. All right, so you can see we have Jack right there in the middle. There's our giant. And we have a buffalo, which you'll see where the buffalo comes in later. He's part of the fracture. And the cat is a funny companion, and he's going to be throughout the whole story. So we'll always find the cat. He's kind of just like a little Easter egg, kind of that clue to find on every page. Excuse me. All right. Once there was a young cowpoke named Jack who lived with his ma, Annie Okie Dokie, on a dusty little desert ranch. So Annie Okie Dokie is reference to Annie Oakley, who is one of the most famous female gunslingers of the Wild West. A no-good giant had stolen all the cattle off their ranch, the bar none. All they had left was an old milk cow named Fred. Think about that for a second. They had an old milk cow named Fred. A milk cow, so if it produces milk, is it a girl or boy? Girl, right? So would we name it Fred? Probably not. So that's the problem here. They have a milk cow named Fred. It's not really a girl, and that's part of why this cow is not producing any milk, right? And that's why they're going to decide to sell her. One night, as they ate their supper, Annie said, "Jack, we are fresh out of food and money. You'll have to take Fred to town tomorrow and sell her." So there's our cow poking in the window. You can see how hungry they are. They've got a shoe on the table that they are about to dig into. And there's our cat. And he always has something pretty silly to say in a speech bubble there. So he said, "This is going to need a lot of ketchup." All right, so he's got to sell their cow. And that's just like the original story. She said, "We're out of money. You got to go sell the cow. That's all we have left." The next morning, Jack and Fred hit the trail just as the sun cleared Bad Luck Butte. Along the way, Jack met a peddler with a creaky old wagon. So a peddler is like our modern day salesman, right? He is peddling or trying to sell his product, and that would be his vehicle where he's selling everything. "Howdy, stranger," the peddler said. "That's some cow you got there. You want to sell her?" "Sure," Jack answered. "I'm on my way to the market right now." "Well, why not sell her to me and save yourself a long trip into town?" the man asked. "I'll give you this bag of magic beans and this great tasting gum." So Jack and his mom are starving. They don't need gum. Plus, it's already chewed gum in his pocket. Gross. But in the original story, you remember that Jack has a reputation of not being very reliable, and that's part of the reason they don't have any money left. And so his mom wanted him to sell the cow and get the money, but this is where it all goes wrong. He's going to sell it to the peddler instead of to the market. About that gum, is there any flavor left in it?" asked Jack. "Well, you bet. I only been chewing on it for 3 weeks. So the peddler headed off with Fred. Jack went home with a bag of beans, chewing his gum. What do you think? Is his mom going to be very happy? No. And there's our cat digging through the peddler's wagon there, and he said, "There has got to be some pizza somewhere." The cat is starving too. When Jack showed the beans to his ma, she was furious. "Oh, Jack," she cried, "your first cattle drive and you lose the whole herd." And she chucked the beans out the window. She threw him out the window. And some versions of the original have him go to bed and then he throws him out the window. And in this case, his mom throws him out the window and hits a rabbit when she does. And the rabbit says, "You'll be hearing from my attorney," which is a lawyer. When Jack woke up the next morning, a leaf the size of a hay wagon was poking through his window. and a huge beanstalk had grown up right outside the house. Quick as a wink, Jack pulled on his boots and his Stetson hat. So the Stetson hat is that cowboy style hat that he has right there. And his Stetson hat, and started climbing up the stalk. And Jack climbed and climbed until he was eye to eye with elf owls and Harris hawks and even a desert thunderstorm. At last, he poked his head through the cloud. So those animals are all Western style animals that you would find out like near the desert. To his surprise, there in the clouds was a cow munching on grass. Off in the distance, Jack saw an adobe castle. So in the original, you can imagine that classic like Disneyland kind of castle that you see at the beginning of Disney movies, the big fancy stone castle. But because we are in a Western theme here for the fracture, adobe is a very Western style. It's actually made out of dried mud from it's like red earth. Jack's on Adobe Castle, and by now his stomach was growling like an old grizzly, so he headed straight for the castle, hoping for some real grub. And then here's our cat hanging on the sign there, keep out sign, and the cat said, what he thinks it says is, "Welcome, free pizza, all you can eat." He's so hungry, he's kind of delusional, but it actually says, "Warning, keep out, this means you." Now, right in the original, we walk in and we see the giant, but the giant has a cook, a chef. And same thing here. So this is not the giant. This is the giant's chef. In some versions, it's his wife, and in some versions, it's just a person who cooks for him. He walked up to the castle and knocked on the door. "A cook as big as a windmill," answered. "Well, you look like you might be hungry," he said, friendly as could be. "Come on in and I'll fix you some lunch." "Well, that sure would be nice if you think nobody would mind," Jack answered. "Oh, no," laughed the cook. "The giant just loves to have people for lunch." So he doesn't mean people over to enjoy lunch with him. He means to have people for lunch. Giant, Jack thought, but he was hungry enough to eat his boots, so he followed the cook inside. And there's our cat. This time he's running away from a mouse who's bigger than him, and he said, "Maybe I should become a vegetarian. Maybe I should stop eating mice." And the mouse is chasing him with a fork and a knife in his hand. Just as Jack was fixing to take his first bite, the giant stomped in through the front door. Jack had seen the giant's face before on a wanted poster. And that's another reference to the Wild West. There wasn't any like police force yet. And so the sheriff would just put wanted posters up, and then people would help him look for the bad guys. He was Wild Bill Hiccup, who's another Wild Bill Hickok, was another famous gunslinger in the West. The famous cattle rustler, and he was ugly enough to peel the paint off a picket fence. If I can catch that yellow-bellied coyote, Jack thought, I'd get a lollapalooza of a reward. Suddenly, Wild Bill pinched his nose and roared. So that means he smells something, just like the original. So in the original fairy tale, it is an English tale, so he smells Jack, and so he says, "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman." But here in the West, he says, "Yippee-yi-yay, yippee-yi-you, I smell the boots of a buckaroo." And there's our cat in that barrel, and he said, "This coffee is strong enough to do push-ups." So Jack is always in the stories hiding behind something right on the table, trying to avoid being seen by our giant. You can see that he's got an arrow in his hat, so he's obviously been in some sort of fight. But quick as a wink, "Oh, quick," whispered the cook to Jack, "hide or he'll make a sandwich out of you." And he dropped him in the jar of pickles. So the cook is doing that to save him, to hide him from the giant. And the cat is in the pickles, and he said, "But I already had a bath this month." The giant looked everywhere for Jack. Finally, he gave up, sat down at the table, and started wolfing down his supper. When the giant was eating, the cook brought in an old raggedy trunk and set it on the table. The giant pulled out a lasso, a banjo, and a furry buffalo. So in the original story, we have the cook puts him in a cupboard to try to hide him, not in the pickles. And you're going to see the reference to the furry buffalo and the banjo and the lasso are important here. In the original, the banjo was a harp. So a beautiful harp would be that European instrument, and the Western version would be a banjo. He took the lasso and looped it over some French fries. Pop, fizzle, bang, I'll be hornswoggled, Jack gasped. The lasso had turned the fries to gold. Right, there's some golden French fries, and the cat says, "Golden fries, great idea!" Because he wants to eat them. All right, in the original story, it was not a buffalo. And the fractured version makes it Western, right? But in the original, it was the goose, the goose that lays the golden egg. I'll be hornswoggled. The giant bellowed, "Buffalo, buffalo, lay some gold, great big chunks that I can hold." And soon mounds of solid gold buffalo chips piled up on the table. See what a buffalo chip is? I mean, buffaloes don't lay eggs, right? It's poop. Buffalo chip is what you call poop. He's pooping out gold, right? So that would be the Western version of laying. The goose that laid the golden egg is the buffalo that poops gold. Wild Bill rubbed his eyes. "Banjo," he yawned, "all this money makes me tired. Sing me to sleep or else you're fired." Before long, the giant was snoring loud enough to give the rock a headache. Jack plucked up his courage and stepped out from behind a chocolate shake. "Reach for the sky, Hiccup," he shouted. "I got you surrounded." But it is, you see what kind of gun that is? It's got a cork on the end attached to a string, right? It's just a little toy gun there. And then here is our banjo, our magical banjo, because we still have to have magic for it to be a fairy tale, even in a fractured. It says home, and he's singing "Home on the Range," which is a Western song. All right, where's our cat? There he is, hiding. The giant's eyes popped open and he jerked his hands high in the air. But then he spied Jack and grinned, a greasy, growly grin that slithered into a sneer. Jack laughed nervously. "Well, good joke, huh, Mr. Hiccup? But I think I hear my ma calling. Yeah, I better hit the trail." But then, quicker than a snake can spit, Jack scooped up the banjo and the lasso, leapt onto the buffalo, and galloped out the front door like his life depended on it, which it did. So in the original, this is where he gathers up the goose and runs down and runs to get away from the giant. So here he's doing the same thing. He's trying to get some of that something that will give him that money, which is the buffalo, and escape. And there's the cat trying to run. He said, "Last one to the beanstalk is lunch." The giant let out a roar that shook the castle and shattered glass. "Thief, thief," he cried. Jack felt the clouds shake and quake as the giant pounded closer and closer. By the time he reached the beanstalk, Jack could smell Wild Bill's breath right behind him. "Pee-you!" And there's the cat running on the buffalo. This is the picture we had on the front cover there. And the cat said, "Now I know what fast food feels like." Because he's running fast and he's about to be food, right? So he's got to get away. You got to think what he could do to get away. Jack wrapped his legs around the buffalo and tightened his grip on his hat, and they jumped right off the cloud. Jack's Stetson hat billowed out like a parachute, and they floated down to the desert floor, landing with a gentle thump. So that's the hat. It's bellowed out like a parachute, and there's the cat. Wild Bill was climbing down the beanstalk when Jack grabbed a rope and a lasso and lassoed a stout leaf. So in the original, if you remember, he gets his axe when he's down on the ground and chops down the stalk. But here he grabs his rope. Remember the lasso? He lassos the end of the big leaf right there. So I want you to take a guess here. I'll pull it up closer. He's got his rope wrapped around the leaf, which is connected to the stalk, and it's attached to the buffalo's horns there. What do you think he's going to do there? Do you see the scissors? How is that going to get rid of the giant? Ready? He was climbing down the beanstalk when he grabbed a rope and lassoed a stout leaf. He tied the other end of the rope to the buffalo and gave him a gentle slap on the rump, yelling, "Giddy up!" So that means the buffalo's going to start running this way and pulling that rope tighter and tighter and tighter, which is going to pull the beanstalk down tighter and tighter and tighter. So think about it. If he cuts that rope tied to the beanstalk so tightly, what's it going to do? Right? The buffalo pulled the beanstalk until it was bent like a huge upside down U, and then Jack tipped his hat to the giant and cut the rope. Wang, shoo, yow, cried the giant. He flew through the air and skidded across the desert, leaving a trail of chaps, jeans, boots, and the granddaddy of all canyons. And there's a little guy over here, and he says, wow, what a grand canyon. So the joke is that by the giant hitting the ground so hard, he made the big crater, and he actually created the Grand Canyon out in the west. Jack showed his ma the wonderful treasures. She was so happy she cried. Pretty soon the bar none was the biggest, fanciest spread west of the Mississippi. Jack bought back Fred, and they all lived as happily as a herd of javelinas and a patch of prickly pears, though sometimes Jack got a little carried away with the golden lasso. So you can see he has turned almost everything into gold, but he's about to lasso the cat because it's one of the last things left, and the cat said, free cat to a good home, right? Get me out of here. But his mom is also hiding because she doesn't want to get turned into gold. He has the banjo. There's our magical like harp from the original, the lasso, and everything else except for our buffalo, of course, has been turned to gold by the lasso. And of course he keeps the buffalo because he can keep pooping the gold for him. All right, so I hope you enjoyed the fractured version, and now that you've heard the original and the fractured, you'll be able to see the differences and what kind of breaks the fracture included. See you guys!